you giving me this advice has affected my ability to create any sort of plausible deniability around
Can we
any
just cut this?
trespassing.
I could kill you quite easily, but I don't because I'm not a killer.
I was banging on the door, and the first thing he said, "Where are the documents?"
Do you want to know more?
Me? Yeah.
Welcome to Nest of Traders Declassified. I'm Claire Weaver, Investigations Editor at Listener, and today I'm joined by creator and host of Secrets We Keep Season 2 Nest of Traders, Joey Watson.
Hey, Claire. Yep. I am your guest today. I'm actually a guest on all of these. I'm sorry, it's the best that we could get. But yes, this is about Nest of Traders, the podcast. This is our little behind the scenes chat where we talk about the podcast. We talk about not the podcasts. We talk about anything really. Who knows what we're going to talk about?
All the interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You got some questions.
that's
I
right.
understand there are some listener questions
We do. We've got
That's
some good
good,
listener questions
because that
today.
means that there are listeners, which is what this is all about.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And today we're talking about episode 3, which is a great one. I love episode 3. So in this episode, you travel to the middle of the Australian desert.
Yes.
Why?
Well, by this stage in the investigation, I'd been confronted with the fact that ASIO had been penetrated by the KGB during the Cold War, that a spy had turned to work for the enemy. I had set out to find them. I looked into the whole story of the guy that they originally pinned, George Sedil, found out that that was probably a distraction. He probably wasn't the real guy. He wasn't the real story. And in this episode, I start to get hints that there might have actually been not just one mole, but possibly more. And I also learn that the KGB were sending some of their best spies to Australia, that Australia was a priority target. And I honestly wondered why. Australia is lovely. We've got nice beaches and all that sort of stuff. But I assumed that probably wasn't the reason that the KGB was sending some of their best recruits here to target the country and ASIO. So, in searching for answers to that question, I was pointed not to the cities, not to Melbourne or Sydney or even Canberra, but to the desert, to a tiny town in the middle of the desert, about 7 hours north of Adelaide, where all sorts of crazy stuff went on. And I wanted to go out there to find out.
Excellent. And have you ever ventured out into the middle of nowhere like that before in Australia?
I've been to Alice a couple of times. I actually spent a few months in Alice Springs a while ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I've also done a trip to Broken Hill. This is even more deserty than those places. This is, from what I understand, one of the flattest places on Earth. And that's part of the reason that it became of such interest to the whole Western Alliance, because they wanted to do some stuff there that would make us interesting to the KGB.
And the flatness was important.
The flatness was important. So if you haven't listened to the podcast, there's a hint as to what it was. The flatness was important. Hint number 1. Can you guess what it is?
And what did you do in preparation for going to Woomera?
So I tried to track down people in the town that would talk to me. Woomera is a defense town. There's another hint. It's still today a defense base controlled by the RAAF. And I didn't get any responses, really. I was sort of like passed between people, and when I tried someone that wasn't from defense, I'd pretty much ended a defense email, and I don't know if I was being deliberately roadblocked. I have no evidence that I was. I've done a bit of reporting on defense. Like, I'm not like notorious or anything, but like I feel like maybe if they Googled me, I don't know. I've like spoken to some defense whistleblowers in the past. Maybe they weren't that keen to just give me a tour of an active defense base.
And did you go through like the defense media team?
Yeah, but I didn't hear anything. I think I was like consulting with you about it at the time as well.
I think, we tried. I remember you being frustrated because we came up with a lot of contact numbers for people in Woomera and yet just kind of got ignored.
Yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
there's 2 clues about Woomera. No, 3. That's 3 now. It's flat, it's a defense town, and it's secretive.
Yep. Yeah. So you head off to Woomera, you get on a flight, you drive, 7 hours, did you say?
Yeah, it's about a 6.5 hour drive. Yeah.
And then
Wait,
what
I'm
was
so
it
sorry.
like?
So sorry. Joey, can you just shrink your chair? Or Claire, can you elevate your chair? Just,
Your levels are a bit different.
yeah.
Am I going the right way?
That would only be for that wide shot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I hate that wide shot.
Is this going to end up in the video? I don't know if I'm going up or down.
Is it working? I don't know.
I don't know if I'm going up or down though.
I think I can hang on.
I'm so sorry.
I've used these chairs before because it's this one here.
Oh, okay.
Hang on.
So goodness knows
I
what that
think
other one was
if you
doing. I think it was
go-
tipping me forward.
Wait. Oh wait. There we go.
Oh,
How are the
yay.
levels?
You're good.
Sorry, Claire, you can go.
It was the big shaft. Okay.
Yeah, no, that one. Because I've tried to do the same thing in the
Ooh.
studios
This is great.
Whoa!
This is like yesterday when I was wearing heels and everyone was like, "Did you grow over there?" Is this going to be weird though? Am I going to suddenly grow in the course of this investigation?
before. Maybe, but it's okay, I think.
This is our first wide shot. No wide shots.
It
after that.
starts with me like.
Will be.
You'll just progressively get higher. Or like randomly change clothes. But you'll stay the same.
Yeah. It'll just be Chris in the chair for 1 second, just nodding, and then it will come back and it'll be Claire.
Jake was in the chair. I'm literally going to cut to Jake going, mm-hmm.
Do you know what though? This is all actually great because that would be quite a good way to get people to watch. Have an Easter egg in like every single one. See if you can be the first to spot what our hidden Easter egg today is.
Yeah.
my
Is
God.
it an
And like
Easter egg?
you appearing
Yeah.
for a microsecond.
Or is it an editing mistake?
The episode where Claire grew a beard.
Yeah, no, we just cut back and then Claire's got a mustache disguised in one shot. And then
Well,
cut back.
I'm asking a question, but it's still your voice.
Miming.
I love this. Yeah. So you get on your flight, you drive 7 hours, and you arrive. What's Woomera like?
It's one of the strangest places I've ever been. The landscape, you kind of know, anyone that's driven into the desert kind of knows how the landscape can change so quickly, and it's certainly true of this drive north from Adelaide. You kind of go from the hilly city of Adelaide, and then it becomes flatter and flatter, and then you pass your first salt lake about 2 hours out, which is pink, which is very cool. And then you pass Snowtown, which is famous for other reasons. And then it just starts to get flatter and flatter and redder and redder. And then there are little families of emus, but otherwise the landscape becomes completely lifeless and extremely silent as well, except for one really long train that sort of traverses the landscape in the distance. So what's Woomera like? You pull into Woomera and it's not that big. It's like the size of a small suburb. It kind of reminds me of an island because it's built in otherwise uninhabitable terrain in the way that it's like, a little area of land. But because of the conditions in which it was built, it's full of trees. They built a pretty elaborate recycling water system, so it's actually very green. It's got a fully functioning AFL field, which is like, because of the rest of the landscape, is like quite startling. And there's rockets everywhere on every corner, but particularly in the beginning, in the middle of town, there's a big rocket park, and that's one of the most noticeable things there. It's these are not active rockets. These are retired rockets that were tested in the Woomera prohibited area. Oh, I just gave it away. I didn't even give a fourth clue. I just gave it away. Oh,
blew it.
Now you know,
Secret's
Claire.
out.
Now you know what they did at Woomera. But they're built in the they've sort of been restored and put on display in the middle of the town.
Excellent.
And it's
So it's
quiet.
basically, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's quiet. There are people wearing defense uniforms. It's still active today.
Okay.
And that's how I describe Woomera town.
So not exactly the Las Vegas of the South Australian desert, but this kind of oasis of life.
Maybe the Los Alamos of the Australian desert.
Perfect.
For some Oppenheimer fans out
Yeah.
there.
They could have that as their tagline.
Yeah, more like kind of like Los Alamos for anyone who saw. In fact, built in similar conditions and with similar ideals to Los Alamos, but stranger,
Right.
even more remote, even flatter landscape, and maybe just the fact that it's in Australia makes it weird. I don't know.
And does
I don't
everyone there
know.
work for defence? Is that, or because that seems to be the main purpose of the town?
Yeah, there are a lot of defense uniforms scattered around. There are some American accents I heard at dinner time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Wow.
So it's still going.
So it's a different kind of place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And you actually found someone who agreed to talk to you in Woomera after being pretty much blocked before you got there. What did they tell you?
Yes, I was eventually directed down to the barracks where I met a guy named Russell. He had been the facilities manager there for a whole bunch of years, but he had a history of a history with Woomera that went right back down to his days as a Boy Scout. He was in the Cubs, and he'd visited there when he was like an 11-year-old or something. And it was through Russell that I really started to get an insight into the history of the town, and that's when, for this story, things start to become interesting.
And how so?
So Woomera was set up in the 40s at the behest of the British originally, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, to test rockets. Rockets at the time were like something from science fiction. The Germans had developed something called the V2 rocket in the final years of World War II, and they had flown them across the horizon into London. And they'd crash and they'd killed civilians. And that's pretty crazy, because even that as a concept for someone who, that's like part of the world now. We know what rocket technology is. It's being used in conflict zones all around the world devastatingly today. But the idea that you could, you wouldn't even, flight technology wasn't even that old. And this is like flight technology, but you don't even need someone to steer the plane. They can just drop it. And so the British were pretty traumatized. I think it was a pretty traumatizing experience by the V2 rockets. And with the Cold War starting to become at the front, sort of being brought to the forefront of world politics, the Soviet Union had emerged as this new threat that in Europe at the end of the Second World War, or in the years after. It was within those dynamics that the Brits were like, we got to start testing rockets. They looked at Canada, but it was too snowy, which meant land retrievals were impossible. And but then they ended up coming to Australia, and so an area 240, over 200,000 square kilometers, was sectioned off. So this is an area, it's like a third of the size of the state of South Australia. That's an area bigger than the UK itself. Became the Woomera prohibited area. And the town of Woomera, which housed the people, which was completely inaccessible to anyone that wasn't a rocket scientist, so it's rocket scientists or defense personnel or had a security clearance for whatever other reason, and occasionally their families, lived in Woomera in the southeast. So I'm just looking at the map now in my head, the southeast corner, and it was to staff what was the biggest, and I think is the biggest, rocket testing range in the West, possibly even the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we just had the perfect geography for this to occur, and so even though Australia is quite small on the world stage, we're pulled into it. So would I be correct in saying that the UK actually dragged Australia into the arms race during the Cold War?
The dragged makes it complicated. I'm not sure about dragged. Australia was at the time entrenched within the psyche of the British Empire. That was also confronted and made more complicated by World War II. We just had the fall of Singapore, that many Australians felt like they'd been abandoned by Britain. But I think in many ways there was still a sense, a real sense of Britishness. And if this was the responsibility to Britain, then this is what we would do. And secondary to that, there was already in the 40s as evidence of serious anxieties about the Soviet Union as an emergent power. By 1949, they had tested their own atomic weapons for the first time, which was years ahead of what was expected. There's a spy story in that one as well. That's actually an Oppenheimer. There you go, 2 Oppenheimer references in one YouTube.
You should be getting commissioned today.
That's right. Christopher Nolan should be grateful. No. But I think Australians were really, really scared, right? There was already an anxiety. We'd just nearly been invaded. I think we'd do anything we could at the time in some sections to be defended. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if there was a sense of what it would mean in the years to come, sitting from that point in the Cold War so early on, if they knew how how big the Cold War would become over the following decades.
Mm.
And indeed, like in the 60s, by the end of the 50s and the 60s, it's like people were living with a real existential threat.
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
it was justified or not, I mean, that's a complicated question. But yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Mm. And look, something you said that really stood out to me was that if a nuclear war had broken out, the Soviets would have definitely nuked Australia. Can you tell me more about that?
Okay, so that is in relation to something that was set up within the Woomera Prohibited Area. The Woomera Prohibited Area started as a testing base for the UK. Then America got involved. They started testing some weaponry as well using the base. The famous Redstone rocket was tested in Woomera, which is famous because it was made by a Nazi scientist that they'd recruited, named Werner von Braun. That's kind of like alluded to in the most recent Indiana Jones. Anyway, but basically, like, it became useful to not just the UK but the entire West for lots and lots of different reasons. And one of those reasons was that America established a listening post, a kind of spy base, about 15 minutes south of Woomera village in the Woomera Prohibited Area that they called Narunga. Narunga was set up in the late 60s. Its specific purpose was to monitor the takeoff of Soviet missiles or any missiles all around the world. It received data from 3 satellites that were stationed above the equator, and they were able to monitor like the infrared plumes, or using infrared sensors to monitor the plumes that came from rockets wherever they were in the Soviet Union. And not only was that important for that reason, it was also would allow the US to monitor the takeoff of its own rockets as well. So if nuclear war broke out, Narunga would be really, really important for the West's ability to wage nuclear war. You know, I mean, it's like, I'm speaking about it quite flippantly, like it's a horrendous reality, and I know I'm speaking about it right now without the like acknowledgement of how absolutely awful that would be. I'm talking about it in very technical terms here, but Narunga was really important for that, and the Soviet Union knew that, and this is in spy documents that were declassified after the Cold War. Australia had acknowledged internally during the Hawke government that was a priority nuclear target. The Soviet Union would have wanted to take Narunga out. They probably, before thinking about dropping nukes in cities, they would have tried to get one right into the desert, because it was really important for the war gaming of America and the West.
Yeah, there's a sliding doors moment.
Mm.
So by kind of unquestionably siding with Mother England, we are actually putting ourselves at significant risk.
Yeah, in many ways, and that's a really complicated foreign policy question that people, like really smart people, still grapple with today. In relation to, for example, AUKUS, it's that like trade-off of security, which brings us into foreign policy alliances. That means that we become implicated in wars that other countries are fighting,
and we're kind of putting our neck on the line as well, becoming
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But I mean, it is interesting, yeah.
Mm.
But I guess like that the thing is that like bringing it back to the KGB, the Soviet Union were really interested in what was going on in the desert and in Australia.
And actually, in that episode, you went out to try and suss out that listening base at Narunga, but someone had to rein you in before that, and we have a grab to listen to here.
No unauthorized entry. Beyond this point, trespassers will be prosecuted. By order, area administrator.
Bastard.
Yeah, sorry, Joey, we're not doing that. I refuse.
Well, I've got to find somewhere to turn around.
You can just Yui here.
Not really. I'm going into the bush.
Then you can Yui here, dude. I don't want to be fucking prosecuted. Just chill your horses.
I'm a shield, but
Pull your Yui. It's probably like a fucking one thing.
I'm going to drive off here.
You can go a little bit.
Oh, Jake.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake.
I'm
Thank
so,
you.
You're lucky I wasn't in the car with you. I would have been like, yeah, go.
I've heard that many times now, and I do sound pretty bitchy when I'm talking to you, so apologies for that.
Well, I'm like chewing on a pear.
I wondered what you were eating. I was about to ask you that too. You sound like you guys are, yeah.
I was having a pear.
Whose music was that?
That was mine.
That's your playlist?
I think it was like some sort of DJ Seinfeld house mix vibe.
in the middle of Woomera.
But I want to unpack your fear. Joey, you wanted to go, obviously, in search of the story. Jake, you had a hesitation for what reason?
Well, because there was a literal sign out the front that said if we proceeded any further that we could potentially be prosecuted.
It would have definitely impacted the release schedule of the podcast.
But, sometimes you just don't see signs.
Yeah.
You accidentally go somewhere and you go, oh, I'm really sorry I didn't see that sign.
It was a very clear sign.
It happened.
Willful ignorance, Claire, is
Claire,
a valid
I-
defense
I-
in the court of law.
I just had a
he
vision
had an eye
of-
problem and he
of-
was blinking during that bit, okay?
Yeah, see? I have a
Remember it.
vision of this being played in the court of law one day. I feel like you giving me this advice has affected my ability to create any sort of plausible deniability around
Can we
any
just cut this?
trespassing.
But I do remember we were somewhat confused because prior to us trying to travel to Narunga and see if we could even suss it out, we Googled it. And then on the Google reviews, there were people who had uploaded pictures of themselves out the front of these. In the episode, you call them they're the radomes, they're the listening devices.
yeah.
They look like golf balls. And
Yeah,
so
giant golf balls.
there were people pictured out the front of them, but then if you looked closer into the pictures, they had name tags on. So surely they must have had some sort of security clearance that they were actually able to go out to Narunga. I'm remembering this correctly, aren't I?
Yeah. And also, sorry, and this is something we didn't say, which is important. It was decommissioned. It's not an active base.
No.
The functionality of Narunga got integrated with Pine Gap,
Oh, okay.
which is a more famous
Yeah.
US spy base that does a lot more things than that.
Mhm.
But they now have extra radomes that does the Narunga job as well. From what I can gauge about what goes on there.
But we're here now and we're not in trouble. We're not in
Yeah.
trouble for now.
We
We
survived.
did
this
not do
episode of
anything
this.
illegal defense.
yeah.
Yeah, not yet.
No, we survived. But it was genuinely just interested in historical inquiry from a point of view of historical inquiry.
Absolutely.
But look, I appreciate. Thank you, Jake.
Would have been cool to see the golf ball, though, just saying, Jake. Okay, so towards the end of this episode, you go and visit Woomera Cemetery, which is a few minutes' drive out of Woomera, and you found something pretty confronting. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So after we didn't see the golf balls, Jake and I went and had a couple of beers to commiserate, and to re-strengthen our friendship over over a couple of beers.
Reconciliation beer.
And I was just sort of looking at the map, being because we come a long way, and I just wanted to make sure that there was nothing here that I hadn't seen that we should see. And by this stage, it was getting close to sunset, and then I just saw on the map that there was a Woomera cemetery that was just sort of plotted. If you imagine Woomera as a little island town surrounded by red earth, then there was a teeny dot just outside Woomera which said Woomera Cemetery. And I was like, oh, we should go and have a look, right? Just thinking, cemeteries carry a lot of history, and we're there on a historical inquiry, and I thought it would be a good thing to do. But then I drove out there. We drove. It was a couple of minute drive from town. The sun was setting behind us, and it was just a little green fenced off area next to the road in the middle of the desert. And I just started. Okay, so I go along a row, and I see that there's a baby, a stillborn baby, and then I walk down a couple, and then there's maybe a 3-month-old, and then there's another stillborn, and then I realized that in this small cemetery, which couldn't have had more than 150 lots, 150 grave sites, it was just mostly stillborn or newly or very, 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 very young babies. And that was one of the strangest experiences of my career.
Yeah. I think we've got an audio grab of when you first came back from that.
When I went in there, I just started to notice that so many of the tombstones were of really young kids or stillborn. Maybe, there was not that many graves, but there was heaps of cases of a few months old babies. And it's pretty confronting.
Are you okay?
I'm fine, but I didn't expect that's what was going to happen when I got here. And yeah, so
Yeah, it's the opposite to what you expect in a cemetery, isn't it? You expect elderly people.
Yeah, especially the cemetery is already just such a weird thing
Mm.
because of its location. I mean, the whole setup is like, God, like just like human culture is so weird. The fact that we produce such a strange place in such a weird context in history, and the fact that it's still operational. And yeah, and then that was just like just not unexpected and very confronting.
So why were there so many graves of young babies there? Do we have any clues as to why?
It's probably a question that's worthy of a podcast series in itself, because I started Googling and I was kind of shocked that the answers weren't easily forthcoming. Um, the best theory, and probably the realist theory, is also the most depressing one.
And what's that?
Well, so I said earlier how, and it's explored in the podcast, how Woomera had been used for a whole bunch of different things. But one of those things was, and possibly the best remembered things, was the testing of atomic weapons as part of Britain's atomic testing programs, and that happened. It wasn't directly linked to the Woomera town itself, but it happened within the confines of the Woomera prohibited area. In the sort of far reaches, after the area had already been sectioned off, it was kind of a perfect fit, and that happened at a place in the sort of up the far northwest, called Emu, and then the more famous ones, I think there were 6 of them that were detonated at Maralinga after that. And the legacy of Maralinga has been explored in many great documentaries, and there's been fantastic journalism done about that over the years. And I will also say about Maralinga that it's kind of got its own history, because they set up a town and an air landing strip at that site, which meant it kind of became its own story, even in relation to Woomera. But before that, the bombs that were exploded at Emu, they didn't really have the facilities, so they used the town of Woomera, which had just been established as a kind of base for soldiers who were involved in the testing. And one of the things that they would do is they would fly planes. They had a series of planes called Lincolns that would take off from Woomera, and they'd actually be instructed to fly through the mushroom clouds to measure its distance and to do other sorts of testing and sampling. And in many cases, I've read that the soldiers that did that, or the pilots that were involved in that, didn't even really wear protective clothing. These were very early days, and the understanding of radiation and the implications of radiation weren't fully formed then. So they would come back, they'd be contaminated, and potentially they would have passed that contamination on to their wives, who might have been pregnant at the time, and that could have led to higher rates of stillborn children. I couldn't see anything that part of this story, and the history of atomic testing has been very well investigated in Australia. There was even a royal commission into it, but I haven't seen a particular inquiry. I saw an article in the Adelaide Advertiser from about 10 years ago that talked about some kind of lawsuit or class action that was directly related to the stillborns at Woomera Cemetery, and the victims in that case were pointing the finger at the atomic testing, and they wanted compensation for that. But I only read that one article, and I didn't really see where it went. I think I sort of realized that, this podcast is about my journey to find the spy that betrayed Australia. This was obviously something that was very serious and confronting at the heart of it, but I felt like I could go down an enormous, never-ending rabbit hole trying to solve this one, which there I will do. If anyone knows about Woomera Cemetery that's watching this video, please, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love it if you could reach out. There are some very clear unresolved questions. It's when you see a cemetery in the middle of the desert that it's full of the graves of unborn children, it's quite a natural thing to ask why.
Absolutely. It's bleak but important,
Mm.
and another mystery. Heaven knows you just keep coming up with more mysteries on this
Yeah. Well,
journey of yours.
mm.
You mentioned earlier that Woomera is still operational. Are they still actually conducting weapons testing in South Australia? And do we know anything about what's going on?
As you drive into Woomera, if you squint at the horizon, it's so strange. Like you can see the outline of a huge metal structure that's obviously some kind of launcher. And there are little hints along the way that there are things going on out there. It's very clear that you're not allowed to leave the highway because the Woomera prohibited area, although it has shrunk since the Cold War, is still active and things are still being tested out there. But that wasn't really part of the inquiry that I went into for this podcast. Like, I feel like there was endless rabbit holes that I could have gone down. I understand that there are a lot of contractors that, like defense contractors, that use the space for testing weapons. I mean, obviously, it's as the biggest weapons testing range in the West. It's like obviously a very valuable piece of real estate for people engaged in that kind of work. But yeah, I mean, it's active. Like it's very apparent that there's still stuff going out there. I'll tell you something a little bit more juicy. I was just speaking to a friend who was in the special forces, an army guy, before I was going out there. Like not even really about this story, and I just mentioned it to him. And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's stuff going on out there." And I was like, "Yeah." Like I know I'm thinking about like the testing and stuff. And he's like, "Look, I can't tell you anything, but let's just say it looks a lot like Afghanistan."
Whoa.
Like the landscape.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Right.
I just wondered what sort of training might have been going on out there.
Be fascinating, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
To know all the secret operations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know there was a place in WA where I think it was the SAS had built a full Afghani town as a training facility. And I just wonder maybe if there's similar stuff that's going on out there. Like,
Yeah.
It's amazing how much of that whole state of South Australia is actually defense has. I mean, not control over. I know that like the land, how the land is owned and occupied is complicated, but yeah, but geez, like it's a lot of space for them to do a lot of different stuff. Like
Yeah.
not many countries in the West would have that.
Yeah. That vast.
Or the West today, whatever that is,
Yeah.
that complicated idea. And I can imagine it would be very valuable for people wanting to.
And it's
stuff.
South Australia, so it's the perfect cover because everyone thinks South Australia is sleepy, or some people say boring. I'm not saying boring, but some people say that. Perfect cover.
Not
Do
during
some ear-
Fringe.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to listener feedback. We've got a DM from Hannah, who has asked you on Instagram, there's a lot of old archive in this episode. Why does every Aussie from the 40s and 50s sound so British and proper?
Oh, that's such a funny question. I was actually talking about this with my mates the other day. I don't agree. It's a bit different to sounding British. The Australian accent from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s is so weird and unique. It's like halfway between Australian and British with something else in there. And I've never met anyone that can do it.
Well, I know one person who can do it, but
Who?
it's
Who?
Mike
Get them
Dalton.
on the line.
Mike Dalton at
Okay.
9 News. He can.
Oh,
he can
really?
do it perfectly.
Okay,
Amazing.
shout out to Mike Dalton.
Yeah.
That's so
Mike,
cool.
if you're listening.
That's so cool. I was literally on the weekend. I didn't even know why we ended up talking about this. I actually can't remember how we got to it. I was probably rabbiting on about the podcast. My poor friends, but they, we were just trying to do it, and it's impossible. I'm not going to do it.
It's
I'm
very
not-
clipped as well, isn't it? It's that,
Yeah.
especially broadcasting voices. They were very clipped, so it had that kind of English thing of clipping it. But you're right.
Yeah.
There's still the Australian accent underneath it. So
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so unique, and it's funny how different that is to the way Australians speak now.
yeah,
Anyway, like that's whole
yep.
yeah.
I think we've got more casual and slower, maybe.
Yeah, and more. Yeah, it's actually the in betweenness that makes it difficult because it's very hard to try and do it without actually just going full Queen's English, like trying to speak like the
Yeah.
Queen.
But then if you flip it, it's like when English people try and do Australian accents and they just go way overboard and it just sounds wrong.
Well, everyone kind of struggles with the Australian
Yeah, they
accent,
do.
even Americans as well.
Mm.
But it's very easy to do like a British accent.
Yes.
There's probably some Brits who are like, "What the hell is that guy doing?" But if I
Indeed,
conducted
Watson,
the rest of the
indeed.
interview, that's quite hard because it's quite extreme. But the Australian British accent is no, I'm not going to try.
You said you weren't going to try.
I'm not going to try. There you go. I lowered myself to it.
Couldn't resist it.
Yeah.
And the last question for you, Joey, is why was visiting Woomera important for your investigation, and what did you learn about the mole or moles from this experience?
I think that it was really important for me to set the scene. I had racked my brain trying to work out why the KGB had been so interested in Australia, and I was left with this picture of Western empire that was all really closely related to each other. And I think in the Anglosphere, the UK, America, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, they formed an intelligence sharing network called Five Eyes during the Cold War that still exists today. So even though there was obviously separate countries with like separate foreign policies and stuff like that, I think the Soviet Union really saw them all as being in some ways connected, and certainly saw each country as a way to be able to access the secrets of
So
the
they were
other.
just looking for the weakest link.
Yeah, I've heard Australia described as the back door.
Mm.
We were the back door to US intelligence. We were the back door to British intelligence. And I think when it became apparent, they sort of went in. They went all in on it. Yeah.
Sorry, rest of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll let you down.
Well, yeah. All's well that ends well.
Okay, so that's it for episode 3. Next up is episode 4. What can you tell us about what's coming next?
In episode 4, I go back inside ASIO. I learn about an investigation that tore ASIO apart, and I discover how a mole could have got in there in the first place.
Fascinating.
Or indeed, moles, plural,
More than one mole.
potentially. Yeah.
Can't wait.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Joey.
I could kill you quite easily, but I don't because I'm not a killer.
I was banging on the door, and the first thing he said, "Where are the documents?"
Do you want to know more?
Thanks for watching Nest of Traders Declassified, where we take a behind-the-scenes look at what went on in making episode 3 of season 2, Secrets We Keep, Nest of Traitors.
Yes, thanks so much, Claire. And please listen to the podcast if you can, and like and subscribe this video, and slide into our DMs. If you want to talk some shit with us in this show, we'd love to hear your questions, or I don't know, just like what you found interesting. And if you're the spy who betrayed Australia, that would also be great.
Give us a call.
Because yeah, that would just be so convenient. But yes, but please, like, get in touch. And yeah, I'm looking at you and them, and
Yeah.
and
5 stars.
And
Give the
listener.
podcast 5
yes,
stars.
that would be really nice. Yeah, thanks heaps.
Listener.